Hi there and welcome to beautiful France. I am currently staying in the village of Montbrun, literally means brown earth. And this is a tiny village in the region of the Languedoc. And it's one of those famous wine areas. And I'm surrounded here by vineyards. Beautiful vineyards. And the vines are still very young, because it will take months for these to bear fruit. But you can already see the small beginnings. If you look closely, you see here these tiny green dots. These are going to be the grapes that will then be turned into delicious Languedoc wine. But there is more in this region, in this area. Over there, if you look closely, in between the trees, you can see a very old church, a chapel that is located here, situated in the middle of these vineyards, in the middle of nowhere. And I'm going to take you a tour of that small church because there is a wonderful story connected to it. If I turn this way, in the distance you can see the mountains. These are not the high mountains of the Pyrenees, although on a bright day you can see those in the far distance, and some of those mountains even have snowy tops, even in the month of May. It's a very quiet area. You may be able to hear, if I stop here for a second, the crickets and a few birds. Normally you would also hear the sound of the wind because it's a pretty flat area. The wind can be extremely strong yesterday, even though it was a beautiful day and the sun was shining, but the wind was extremely strong. So here, beyond this hill, you can see even more vineyards over there in the distance. And you can also see a small village. That is the town of Montbrun. It's got a small parish church on top of the hill. And that is where Father Theo lives. And Father Theo is a friend of mine. And he lives here in France, but it has not always been the case. He used to be a parish priest in the Netherlands, just like me. But about 2 years ago, he felt a vocation to become a hermit, to change his life completely. And he ended up here in this town, and that is his chapel. So let's go take a look. Just like me, Father Theo was in a couple of parishes with many churches, very busy. He also was one of the priests that would celebrate Mass that was then also broadcast on TV. And he loved his work and his life as a priest. But here in France, he received what he calls a second calling. He's a couple of years older than I am. And he felt when he was on vacation here in France, in the middle of the night, he would wake up. He was staying in a small house in the village. And he felt that God was calling him. And not once, but several times. And he would wake up, and God said actually to him, "Viens, come and stay here." And when he saw this church, he kind of fell in love with the building. He's like, this is where God wants me to be. And of course, that requires a lot of discernment, because he wanted to make sure that he wasn't imagining things. Because why would a priest from the Netherlands live here in this remote place? And also at the same time when there are so few priests in the Netherlands. So he wanted to make sure that it was truly God who was calling him. So after a lot of prayer, a lot of time also asking the advice of many people, he felt that this was truly what God was calling him to do. And so last year, he moved to the village and was able to get a very small house there. That's his cell, because He would, of course, love to live next to this chapel, but there are no buildings. There used to be buildings in the Middle Ages. This is a very old church, but they're all demolished. They're all long gone. Maybe one day in the future. But so he lives in the village. That's where he prays, and then every morning at 8:30 he celebrates Mass in this church. And I happen to have the key of the church. He gave me the key to show you around. So let's go take a look inside. The times of the Masses are indicated, and here is the keyhole. There we go. It's a very strong, thick door, because temperatures can get really low in the winter. And here we are in this church that dates back to the 11th century. As you can tell, it's built in a Romanesque style. Very tiny windows. There's only one window that still has stained glass, and it shows that right there above the altar, the image of the Virgin Mary carrying her child. All the other windows were broken. And when Father Theo first came here and was praying in this church, it was in the winter time. And most of the windows were gone. And if you look at the rooftops, you see those white dots. Those are not lights. Those are just plain holes in the wooden ceiling. And so he would freeze here every day when he came here for his prayers. So this church is in great need of a restoration. That, of course, is very costly. And since the churches in France, the older churches, belong to the state and not to the church, it also requires a lot of red tape to go through. This here is, of course, the baptismal font. And what makes this so special is not just its huge size, it's hewn out of a rock, but it's the age of this baptismal font. This font dates back to the 8th century. So it's 4 centuries older than the church itself. It's very deep, as you can see, because it would be filled with water and people were sometimes immersed in it. And it almost kind of looks like an egg now that I think of it. Nice symbolism of the new life in Christ that begins at baptism. And of course, this baptismal font was at the entrance, because it was literally the entrance to the family of the followers of Christ. And so once you were baptized, that's when you could enter the house of this family. The benches in the church are, of course, of a much later date. In the Middle Ages, churches didn't have benches or seats. People would just stand. These are probably from the 19th century. And they all have numbers. And sometimes when people gave a donation, then they would have their reserved number. And then here is where we celebrated Mass in the morning, ad orientem, which means facing east. That was the original way of praying and of celebrating Mass. So the east is that way, and the light in the morning of the rising sun shines through that window on the altar itself. The altar also probably much older than the church itself. At least the lower part, you can see that there is a cross carved into this ancient stone. And also the table itself, the stone table, looks to be very, very old. And these holes were used to lift it up. They would stick in poles so they could carry it up. And I could take a look if there's an altar stone. I'm not sure, actually. I should ask Father Theo, because an altar often contains relics. But it's also very damaged. So that may have been removed. Although, let me take a look. I see some carvings here. I'm not sure. Can't really tell if there are relics in this altar. I kind of doubt it. That, of course, is the tabernacle where the consecrated bread, the body of Christ, is kept. And above that, you see a small statuette, which is also very old, I think probably 17th century, also of the Virgin Mary holding her child, and you can see how much it has been damaged. On her feast day, they put robes on it, but look at the foot of this statue. It's completely demolished and it's breaking down. Here is an oil lamp that indicates the presence of the consecrated hosts in the tabernacle. And then here on the right side, we see the statue of a saint, and we don't know, we can't figure out what saint this is. Posted a picture on Facebook to ask for help, but we just can't identify her. She looks like a kind of more of a medieval saint. There is a medal, and the saint is carrying a book. And there are several saints that are depicted like that with a book. The hand is probably has broken off, so I think this is a hand from another statue that they kind of put in there. And there are no other distinguishing marks, no clues. So if you have an idea, let me know. These metal rails are meant to hold candles, and when Father Theo first arrived here, this church had been abandoned for many years, and there wasn't even any electricity. They just recently installed lights here, but when he first started to pray here, several times a day, he had to light the church using candles. And so he would have hundreds of candles burning in various places to be able to see something, because there are only very few windows. As I said, the churches belong to the state here in France, which makes it also hard to get people moving for restoration work or even simple reparations, like the roof over there is falling apart. But since the state is not that interested in helping the church, it takes a lot of effort to make things move. So Father Theo is just using this chest, it looks like a treasure chest, to keep some of the liturgical books. And this is where, in these two closets, there are the vestments, the liturgical vestments. And also these are probably gifts. And the vestments are also, not the best quality. Let me put them back here. And it's a bit humid in the church as well, so this is definitely not a very good solution. This one has been made out of a former confessional. And you can tell if I open this. Let me see if I can. There's probably a latch or something here. Or maybe it's just... There you go. You see this? It can open, and then here are the holes for the confession. You can close it again. So it's all very hodgepodge, very old and dirty. And Father Theo is trying to find some people to help him finance the restoration, if possible. But as you can imagine, that is very costly. Now, another downside of this being, property of the state is that sometimes people just dump their stuff. This doesn't even belong in this church. It's just people, they have religious stuff in their homes, and then they bring it to the church, and they dumped this here while Father Theo was in Lourdes on a pilgrimage. It's really crazy. So it's a very simple situation, poverty, you could say. But what matters most is the prayer here. And this is an icon of the Virgin Mary, but it is made by one of his former parishioners, and it's made completely by hand. This is all thread. This is not painted. And it took her 11 months to create this icon. It's really gorgeous. And it's a memory of his former life in the parish. Father Theo says it looks as if it's completely useless to be to be living here as a hermit. It doesn't serve a purpose. You don't really run a parish. But he said something that is very true, I think. Father Theo says, prayer actually opens your heart to the entire world. And he feels much more connected to the world and to the Netherlands and to his former parishioners than at home, because here he is able to pray on a very regular basis. He prays, he wakes up at 3:30 in the morning, starts his morning prayers at 8:30 Mass, and then the entire day follows this rhythm of prayer and work and prayer and work. And because of all those times of prayer, he says, in the invisible, I believe that God's grace is working, and this prayer has meaning and is helping the world and is helping the church. And it's true. It's not just about, visible usefulness. If we turn around here, we see a crucifix in what used to be a door. And you can see that this was a door because the attachments are still there. This has just been sealed off. What you see here is an arm, and it belongs to poor Jesus, who is now missing an arm, as if the cross wasn't bad enough. And then surrounding him are two statues that are from a different time and don't really belong here. This is St. Joseph. You can tell because he is carrying what used to be a lily, so that gives it away. So this is St. Joseph. And then next to that statue is another statue of a woman. I don't think it's the Virgin Mary. It would surprise me. But probably also some medieval saint. There are a lot of local saints here as well. And up there, very tiny, small windows. Beautiful acoustics here. If we sing morning prayer or the songs at Mass, it's absolutely beautiful. With a few voices, you fill the entire space. Now, you may wonder how this church came about. And there is a legend that tells that story, and I want to share that with you because it's a great story. According to that legend, this region, this area, was owned by a rich man in the Middle Ages. And that man had two sons, and he loved them dearly and hoped that one day in the future those sons would take over the vineyards and provide for their families. And so at one point in his life, he hears about the Crusades and that people are asked to help to protect the holy sites from invasions. And the father decides to go on one of those crusades to protect those holy places in the Holy Land. And his sons hear nothing from him for years, and they think he has died, and they take over the heritage, and they continue to live their lives. But one day, the father returns from his long journey, and he's seen many wars and battles. He is emaciated, he's got a beard, he's dirty and tired, and he knocks on the door of the house of his sons. But the sons don't recognize him, and worse, they think he is a beggar. And they chase him away, and they yell at him, and they send the dogs after the father. And the dogs attack the father viciously and kill him on the spot. And when the father lies there on the ground, covered in blood and the wounds that the dogs have inflicted on him, a flock of birds pass by, a flock of doves, and one of the doves lands on the chest of the father and dips his beak in the blood that comes from the heart of the father. And next to the corpse of the father are the papers that show his journeys in the Holy Land, that tell the stories of the crusade in which he partook. And the bird, with his beak dipped in blood, draws the contours of a church on the papers and flies away. And then that becomes the sign that people have to build a church here to honor that father and his ungrateful sons, to repair the damage that had been done here by the dogs. And those contours, according to the legend, are the contours of this church that you see here behind me. It's kind of a mirror story, a story that mirrors the events in the Bible, where it's not the father who dies, but it's the son that is sent away to earth and is killed by man. And it's through the blood that comes from his heart, his sacred heart, that blood has given life to the church. And this medieval tale kind of mirrors that and helps us reflect on the sacrifice that is ultimately always fruitful, that may seem senseless and harsh and tragic, but true sacrifice always gives life. And this church, since the 11th century, stands here and was abandoned for many years, and now life is coming back because Father Theo lives here now and prays here, and through his prayer breathes new life into this church. Speaking of Father Theo, he would love to live as a true hermit next to the chapel. But most of the buildings that were here in the Middle Ages and that housed the priests and some of the other people that like to live close to the church are now in ruins. There is only a small municipal graveyard here behind that gate, but there are no buildings. And since this building is so old and in very bad state, it's impossible to live inside the church because it's just way too cold. But if we follow this path, it's a little bit hidden. Father Theo showed it to me the other day. We arrive at an open space behind the graveyard and behind the chapel that is behind this tree. And this is where Father Theo dreams of one day to build his cell. And you can see that there have been buildings here because these rocks are probably the remains of those houses that used to be here. Now it's used as a kind of a dumping place for I don't know, stuff they use for the roads or something like that. And there are some more remains on this side. You can see that there are some old blocks of stone. And the reason that we know that people lived here is that they also found this ancient wine press. This here is a wine press. And we know that because if we look at the center, it's got this pole which has kind of a screw carved in it. And so they would press down a plateau on the grapes that were here on this stone, and then they would gather the juice, and that would of course be kept in barrels and turn into wine over time. And you can see many more remains of these. So maybe one day in the future there will be funds enough, and also the corporation of the state, because this is a monument. You can't just start building something. Father Theo hopes that one day he may live here and pray for the world in his hermit house. So that is the story of Notre Dame de Colombier, which literally means it's Our Lady of the Doves, or I'm not sure how you call that, a coop, or the house where the doves live. And the doves, of course, refer to that legend. And when I was showing people around here the other day on YouTube, on the live stream, some people asked if they could help. They were wondering if Father Theo had a GoFundMe or something like that. I know that Father Theo is looking for some help, but he's a hermit. I mean, he spends his days praying and not doing fundraisers. So I may have to see if I can do something to help him out, if only for the small things, because he's no longer working as a priest in the Netherlands. he has to live from a very small, monthly allowance, kind of a pension. That's not much. That's certainly so. Whenever something breaks, well, he needs other people to help him out. So I'll let you know if I set something up. And I've been filming here for 2 days now. I may be able to put something together also for YouTube. And a few days ago I was in Lourdes. I also filmed a lot of stuff there. So I hope to be able to share that with you soon as well. So anyway, keep following me. If you know other people that may be interested in this channel, spread the word. And also don't forget to subscribe yourself to see new updates. And thank you so much for accompanying me on this small walk here in the French countryside. Hope you liked the images. And if you're ever in the area, just make sure you visit the website here of Notre Dame. I'll put the website of the church in the show notes, and you may be able to take a look for yourself. It's really, really beautiful here and very quiet. All right, thanks for watching. Talk to you guys soon. God bless.